Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever in the world you are listening today. My name is Seamus Lafferty, and I am president of Accraply, one of Barry Wehmiller's packaging platform companies. Today I'm coming to you from our global headquarters and our US manufacturing facility in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Shrink sleeves have been my passion for more years than I care to think about, and I appreciate this opportunity to share my perspective on the market and how I've seen it develop over the last 20 years or so. When I first started presenting on sleeve labels, I found myself trying to convince audiences that sleeves were not a novelty or a craze. I would speak with converters in many corners of the globe who were trying to convince themselves that the sleeve label was a fad. After all, it had low single-digit market share globally, and it was still totally unheard of in many areas of the world. Well, a dozen years ago, that fad had grown to account for 15% of the world's labels. And today, sleeve labels in all their forms represent almost 1/5 of all the world's labels. 20 years ago, presentations such as this routinely focused on educating the audience as to why all brand owners should be using sleeves and why all converters should be able to produce them. Well, today, the market is innately aware of what the sleeve label can deliver on retail shelves. Today, the sleeve label, and particularly the shrink sleeve label, is established in the mainstream of product decoration. For the balance of my remarks today, I will address only the heat shrink sleeve, or the TD sleeve, which accounts for 90% of total sleeve label volume. Stretch sleeves and roll-fed, or MD, sleeve labels combine to make up the remaining 10%. When we talk of only the shrink sleeve label, we're addressing 17% of the global market for labels. Or are we? Let's dig one layer deeper and consider only primary volumes. That is, let's remove from consideration the significant volume of PS labels that are used in secondary and typically print and apply applications, such as in logistics, for example. When we do that, in fact, the shrink sleeve label accounts for 22% of all labels globally. What's remarkable is it's hot on the heels of PS, or self-adhesive labels, at 23%. So all of this serves to underscore that shrink sleeve labels have been the fastest growing segment of the label market worldwide for a long time, and it's a trend that's projected to continue. Now, before you grapple too much with this in the context of your own local shopping experiences, the statistics I've just referenced are global, and there are significant regional variations across the globe. Asia Pacific still accounts for 73% of all shrink sleeve labels in the world, with Europe a distant second at only 15%, and North America trails even more with only 8%. South America, the Middle East, Africa still barely wiggling the needle in the context of global volumes. The extent to which the shrink sleeve is disproportionately important in Asia is starkly illustrated when you realize that while Asia Pacific accounts for 3 in every 4 shrink sleeve labels in the world, the region accounts for less than half, actually for 45% of all labels in the world. Across all regions, the growth is real, however. And while percentage growth rates are diminishing as volumes grow, volumes have been steadily growing. So, with that high-level data as a backdrop, how can we become more local in our perspective, and how can we capture the regional differences that exist, and more importantly, the regional opportunities that exist? In 2006, I advanced this very simplified conceptual view of the world. Let me explain my logic then, and then let us think about how my view then compares to the world 15 years later. 15 years ago, I pointed to Japan as being at the top of the curve. Not only is Japan the inventor of the technology now over 60 years ago, and not only did it have the highest per capita use of shrink film in the world, it was also the most innovative. And I don't just mean innovative in shape and application on retail shelves. I also mean innovative in materials and methods and processes. I also put Japan on top because it defined the quality standard for the rest of the world. Literally, I used to get lost for hours in 7-Eleven stores in Tokyo, admiring the creativity and the ingenuity and the quality of the Japanese shrink sleeve. It always provided me with the inspiration to keep promoting sleeves in other areas of the world. Sliding down the curve, I positioned Western Europe, again, based on adoption levels across different market segments, based on innovation, and based on the quality of the finished product found on the retail shelves. The North American market I placed behind Western Europe, following that same logic. Finally, and please excuse the egregious generalization here, but I placed developing countries at the bottom of the curve. And I was always quick to point out that there was the opportunity to leapfrog from this position, to learn from those who had gone before and catch up quickly. I always emphasized that the further down the curve you sat, the bigger the opportunity that lay in front of you. My mission in those years was to encourage converters and brand owners to pay attention to quality and to ensure that the shrink sleeve label, which had powerful advantages over every other label format, didn't fall down because of issues of quality. And I'd routinely find examples where the shrink sleeve label fell far short of what pressure-sensitive or self-adhesive labels were able to deliver in terms of appearance on the shelf. My presentations in those days were hard-hitting and critical. I spent a lot of time talking about how not to do shrink sleeves, and I typically used samples I'd buy in region to make my point. So, where are we today? Well, beyond question, the shrink sleeve label has earned its stripes. It's proven its appeal to consumers the world over, and it's proven its value to brand owners the world over. We have a much more sophisticated market today, for sure. We have a much more sophisticated shrink sleeve label today also. We are maturing from the days when package designers pushed the limits of their imagination with their newfound freedom to design shapes and then struggle to successfully sleeve them, or at the other extreme, when they decide to use a shrink sleeve and end up having it look exactly like a PS label, essentially missing all the value the sleeve could bring. It was all a bit random, it was all a bit chaotic, and there were huge issues of quality and consistency within markets and across markets. You could find the same shape executed very well in one place and very poorly in another. Today, we're in an era in which the sleeve is proving its worth on near shapeless containers like beer cans and aerosols. We're in an era where colors are muted and elegant and where achievement in sleeve converting is defined by very high-end, technically challenging pre-press and print jobs. As with this straight-walled cylindrical container that is dressed in an incredible 10-color combination printed sleeve with 2 types of holographic foil and a very intentional level of detail and technical reach. We are in an era where the shrink sleeve covers the gamut from the longest of long runs like the Guinness label to the shortest of short runs like the craft brew label. Despite that the shrink sleeve has become established and mainstream, the levels of innovation and dynamism we see are suggestive of a technology that has anything but peaked. And when you combine that thought with the regional map and see just how much runway it still has in so many parts of the world, there is sound logic behind those forecasts that predict its continued growth. Now, while it is easy to be optimistic about the continued growth of shrink sleeves, we should not be naive. There are headwinds, and we should not take anything for granted. Right now, the shrink sleeve is facing challenges, and it is going to have to adapt and innovate if it is to continue its growth trajectory. The good news is that innovation is already taking place, and you will hear some more about that over the course of this conference. So, what are some of those headwinds? Well, today I'll draw your attention to 4 that I feel are worthy of being on our radar. The first of those is growing sustainability and environmental concerns, and the need for the shrink sleeve to make its way into the circular economy. The war on plastics is playing out in real time. We are all being challenged to reduce or eliminate plastic from our everyday lives, and there is a rise in consumer, in retailer, and in brand owner focus on circular economy imperatives. This is being underscored by various government regulations around the world, such as, for example, with legislation targeting the once ubiquitous plastic shopping bag. This is driving innovation in films, in inks, and in methods and processes aimed at achieving full recyclability and aimed at ensuring the shrink sleeve label doesn't in any way hinder the recovery of PET in recycling streams. Secondly, there are competitive technologies on the rise, and there are 2 that are worthy of particular mention. Direct container printing can legitimately claim sustainability advantages based on eliminating the need for a label in any form. It also offers a unique level of flexibility with regard to enabling individualized and personalized packaging. And if direct-to-container printing eliminates labels, then stand-up pouches eliminate the label and the rigid plastic container. Pouches use anywhere from 40% to 70% less plastic than rigid container and label combinations, and because they are lighter and offer a very effective use of space before being filled and after being filled, they represent huge savings on transportation and warehousing costs. Add to this that they too offer 360-degree and top-to-toe graphic freedom, and it's not difficult to understand their rapid growth. On the flip side, despite that pouches use considerably less plastic, that plastic is generally not recyclable. So there is, I think, a legitimate debate to be had between which is better: a fully recyclable rigid container and film combination, or a stand-up pouch that uses less plastic but isn't recyclable. The third of my 4 trends is e-commerce, which was already a megatrend before the global pandemic kicked online shopping into high gear. According to Business Insider, US e-commerce will grow 18% in 2020, and that's on top of the 15% growth that it demonstrated in 2019. So, how does the switch to online shopping impact the shrink sleeve label? Or perhaps I should be posing the question, how will the shrink sleeve label impact online shopping? Well, at its most fundamental, the shrink sleeve success was driven by its effectiveness at grabbing the attention of shoppers physically walking the aisles of supermarkets. In fact, in recent years, tactile finishes were developed to further enhance the physical shopper's experience with the product once it was lifted off the shelf. I think it's only fair to suggest that the role of the shrink sleeve in the world of virtual shopping remains in question. While there is research that indicates that how a product is packaged is actually more important in an e-commerce world, it would seem logical to me that, at a minimum, the point at which the shrink sleeve has its biggest impact may shift from the point of purchase to the point of unboxing on your kitchen table. Perhaps we will discover in time that the role of the shrink sleeve in establishing brand loyalty and repurchase behaviours will emerge to be just as important as the role it has traditionally played at the point of purchase. Only time will tell. Last, but by no means least, I feel compelled to make the point that quality issues remain in many markets. We can still find examples of all the same old points I used to raise 15 plus years ago. And our experience judging the annual AWA awards reinforces the extent to which this is real. As judges, we continue to be disappointed by what gets submitted. On one hand, we see examples of the most superb shrink sleeves, and on the other hand, we see examples of seaming issues, pre-press and distortion issues, fold lines, as well as application and shrinking problems. So, having established a perspective on the market 15 years ago, having considered some of the challenges facing the shrink sleeve label format today, how has my simplified conceptual view of the world changed? Well, Japan is still on top. Japan's emphasis on quality remains unique. The volume of shrink film usage per capita in Japan remains the highest in the world. Japan's recycling achievements and its long-standing focus on making environmentally conscious film decisions, both on film type and film weights, as well as its long-standing use of zipper perforations to aid in recycling, really underscores the extent to which Japan has been and remains ahead of the curve. Western Europe has most certainly made progress. There are significant quality improvements as well as solid progress in environmentally conscious film selections, and the use of zipper perforations to enable removal of sleeves to aid recycling has been in evidence for quite a few years already. There has also been significant expansion in the range of market segments in which sleeves are used and in overall levels of innovation and in the creativity of design. There are sub-regions of Europe where it is estimated per capita volumes of shrink film usage are within range of Japan, while in other regions we see signs of brands pulling back from shrink sleeves. While I am moving Europe closer to Japan than I positioned it 15 years ago, Japan is so far ahead that it is difficult to materially close that gap. Developing countries, while it is a grossly unfair grouping that obscures a lot of local and country-specific variations, as a whole, I will say developing countries have not moved as far in the last 15 years as I anticipated they would. The shrink sleeve label remains new and is operating more on the fringes and less in the mainstream in many of these countries. That said, it is still the most exciting place to be in the curve, and the opportunity to leapfrog from this position is unquestionably still there. To be fair, I should also point out that within this category, there are some standout examples of improvement, like, for example, Indonesia, which has made measurable progress. And I would also put South Africa in this category too. Overall, North America remains behind Europe, although it must be said that great progress has been made, and you can now routinely find examples of world-class sleeves on retail shelves in North America. My read is that while a portion of the overall market has reached upward, there is still a long tail that is dragging. I can still be disappointed by quality issues in the North American market, although it is nowhere near the problem that it was in the past. A lot of progress has been made in the converting steps of the process, while some challenges seem to remain in the final steps of application and shrinking. Remember, the appearance on the shelf is only as good as your last step in the production process is good. While progress has also been made with, for example, the use of zipper perforations to aid with recycling, it just feels like slow going. Like I have long contended, the North American consumer appears less discerning of quality and design elements and more concerned with bulk purchasing for better value. It would also seem to be the case that the average American consumer is less engaged with environmental issues than their European and Japanese counterparts, although I'm certain that is changing too. I still see incredible opportunity for expansion in the use of sleeves in North America, and this is also influencing where I put this region on the curve. There are segments of the market that now overlap with Europe, but there are segments of the market that don't differ appreciably from what you would find in some developing countries. In the shrink sleeve technology book edited by Mike Fairley and me in 2017, I described the shrink sleeve label as an enigma. Despite that 6 decades have passed since the shrink sleeve was invented in Japan, it is still evolving and developing and challenging us as though it were new. And like I have already alluded to a couple of times, the level of innovation that is emerging across every part of the value chain supports that it has nowhere near peaked. The extent to which it provides package designers and brand owners with a 3D canvas like no other label format can means that we are compelled to keep innovating and compelled to keep challenging ourselves to reach new heights with this still exciting label format. Any serious practitioner in the shrink sleeve world will attest. From a technical standpoint, this label format can frustrate and challenge with each new application that comes along. The combination of container shape and film type and all the other variables that are in play routinely present us with opportunities to learn and develop. The complexities are more likely to increase than to decrease in the near term. As the shrink sleeve label faces headwinds from competitive technologies and from the war on plastics, the necessity to keep innovating is real. And the opportunities to keep learning and expanding our knowledge are real. As we lean into some headwinds together, we should gain confidence from looking over our shoulders at the road we have traveled and the hurdles we have overcome. Let's make sure we work together as a value chain, and let's ensure the ongoing success of the shrink sleeve label. I look forward to the next 20 years with as much excitement and intrigue as I had when I looked into the unknown some 20 years ago. Thank you for listening, and take care.